Oh, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the AIAG and VDA FEMA Handbook and comparison to the SAE J1739 FEMA analysis. We're glad you're here. Do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into introducing the speakers. Just so you're aware, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If you have questions as we're going through wow, okay, that just went out. The presentation. If you have questions as we're going through the presentation, please put your questions into the Q&A box on the bottom. And at the end, we're going to have time for Q&A, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible. If you have a challenge as we're going through, as we're going through this, as far as a technical issue or something like that, please reach out to me directly through chat, and I will do everything possible to assist you and make it work for you. The easiest thing, just to be honest with you, the easiest thing if you're having technical difficulties is to log out and log back in. That would be my first suggestion in regards to trying to fix something, but I will try to assist you as best I can. A couple quick responses to people already asking questions. One is this will be on-demand viewing will be made available within a day or two of completion of this. So yes, you will receive an email with on-demand viewing capabilities that will be available to you to do. So yes, it is being recorded. So hang in there. And we will do the presentation. Presenters will do a sound check real quick once. Actually, go ahead, guys. Jeremy, sound check.
We're good to go.
Brian, sound check.
Good morning, everyone.
So, okay, so welcome. And let me take a minute and introduce the speakers for today. So we have Jeremy Hazel. He's a lead consultant. He is one of our head trainers. Jeremy's been in industry for many years. His knowledge is even overwhelms me, and I've been doing this for over 20 some years. He's written multiple books. An excellent on ISO AS 1345 IATF. So he's across the board, well versed in knowledge. And he specializes in small team development and risk-based thinking implementation strategies. And then we have Brian Martinson from the AIAG. Brian is a graduate of GMI Engineering and Management Institute. He told me that I was supposed to tell you that he got a Heisman Trophy. I don't know what that, that I don't see it in the bio, but hey, well, he got a Heisman Trophy. Feel free to reach out to him and ask him specifically about that. I'm sure he'll explain that one to you. Brian has been in the industry for multiple years as a quality manager, tier 2 suppliers, maintenance engineering. Brian has an excellent background as well. So really, bottom line is we got two of the best experts here today to present to you the comparison between the two requirements. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to Jeremy and Brian.
All right, folks, and welcome to the AIAG and VDA FMEA SAE J1739 comparison. That is a lot of letters. Now, to save myself some time, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to summarize a couple of these things. When I use the term AIAG VDA FMEA, I'm just going to refer to AIAG. And when I use the term SAE, I'm just going to be referring to the 1739. So that way we don't have to repeat this 3,500 times. Now, you folks are with us for an hour, and in order to provide the most value for the hour that you are going to spend, because I am super aware that you are giving up your time to listen to us speak here, I want to launch a poll. Now, the poll is our opportunity to interact with you. So let's go ahead and launch this first poll. There are going to be 4 questions in this first poll. So the first question, what are your customer specific requirements for FMEA within your organization? Pick 1. Which PFMEA methodology are you most familiar with? Question 3, are you and your organization design responsible, process, or both? And lastly, what is the size of your organization? The reason why I want to do this, 1, you don't want to watch me death by PowerPoint for the next hour. Secondly, this helps me frame my front sight focus, okay? So if I know who's in the room, I'm able then to go through and target more effectively my message and provide more value to you. Now, I have a rule. We stop the fun when we get 80% of the respondents. So if you want the fun to stop, participate. Once we hit 80%, I'll stop the poll and I'll share out the results so everybody kind of knows who they might be arm in arm with in the virtual space. All right, looking here, we're about 60% complete. Responses are coming in. And by the way, this energy level continues for the entire hour. Okay, so I don't believe in death by PowerPoint. I'm going to do a little bit of live draw with you. We're going to make this highly interactive. All right, almost there, reaching that tipping point. I have no delusion that we will not get 100 people or 100% participating. So that's another reason why I stopped at 80. For those that are on the call, you're probably familiar with the Pareto principle. Therefore, we'll stop at the 80%. All right, folks, that'll do it. I'm going to go ahead and end polling here. And I'm going to go ahead and share the results just so you know a little bit about who else is in the room with you. We largely are familiar with AIAG FMEA in the 4th edition, and we have roughly the same amount of familiarity with the AIAG VDA FMEA Handbook. So it appears that in this course, a lot of you may have a lot less familiarity with that SAE J1739. All right. And we have some newbies. So congratulations to the newbies. This is going to be like drinking out of the fire hose, but we'll do our best to get you where you need to be. All right. And the methodology you're most familiar with is definitely 4th edition. So no real surprise there based on question 1. Last one. Most people on this call are either both or process responsible. And this is not uncommon because there's not as many design responsible organizations in the world as there are built to print organizations. So this is something we see all the time in training. This helps me determine how much we have to cover the DFMEA versus the PFMEA and where I can provide the most value. And lastly, we've got usually organizations of just under 1,000 people. So somewhere in the mid, say, triple digits. All right, perfect. This is going to help me help you. Now, I've got my little slides here, so we'll go ahead and take the next step. What I'd like to do here, let's go ahead and stop the share, and I'm going to stop my share real quick here so that I can go eye to eye with you for a second. We do have some people that are new to FMEA, okay? So what I'd like to do is I'd like everybody to come together here, and I'd like us to agree on some fundamentals. So let's level set real quick, because one of the things that I see happening is that people choose one side or the other. But if we can agree kind of on where we are in the fundamental methodology, we can do a very realistic, effective, non-biased comparison. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what FMEA is. And for those that are new, congratulations, you're going to learn something right in the first 5 minutes today. FMEA is a team-oriented, systematic, qualitative analytical method. Now, that is the $7 word way of explaining FMEA. What I'm going to do, we're going to make it even simpler. We're going to go through, and what FMEA does, it looks at what the thing is supposed to do. It then looks at how it doesn't do what it is supposed to do. And if it doesn't do what it is supposed to do, then we look at the effect. And because it's not enough just to look at the mode and the effect, we then have to look at what causes it to do what it's supposed to do. Now, once we have this in FMEA, you then say publicly declaring what you're going to do to prevent it, to make sure it does what it's supposed to do, and to detect it. So if it doesn't do what it is supposed to do, how do you know? And lastly, the last piece of FMEA as an overview is that you then decide which actions you are going to take based on the risk to the thing not doing what it's supposed to do. So this is actually very simple fundamentals FMEA 101.
Hey,
Now,
Jeremy,
yes.
Jeremy, you got an ad popped up in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen? Thank
Yep.
you.
Yep. All right. So as an example, with the process FMEA, what the process FMEA is trying to do, it looks at product characteristics that are created during the operation, and then we take a look and assign a technical risk analysis, such as PFMEA. And what we are trying to do is put first things first and focus on failures, let's say, that are related to special characteristics. So really that's what FMEA is trying to do at a glance. Now, when it comes to FMEA, collectively we can agree that this flow that I have up here on the screen is the general flow when you engage in an FMEA. The fundamental first piece is always function. You look at what the thing has to do. Now, notice here, if it's a design FMEA, it's the function of the product. If it's the PFMEA, it's the function of the process. Then you look at the failure mode. And folks, realize that fundamentally for the 1,000+ people that are on this webinar right now, this is key. Failure is the negation of function. Simple. Then you look at the effect, you look at what caused it, you put in your controls, and then you mitigate it. Okay? Very simple. So these fundamentals in what we're going to show you between AIAG and the SAE version are present in both systems. The question is going to be, and it will be your question to answer, after the comparison that we do, it will be up to you to determine which one you consider to have a higher quality of event and which one fundamentally meets your needs. So let's go ahead and clear this out. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Brian Martinson here, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the common themes around FMEA and a little bit of what went on behind the scenes. Brian?
Thanks. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate that. So when we developed the AIAG and VDA FMEA Handbook, we had a similar process to SAE in that we did not author the document ourselves. We brought in automotive industry experts to go ahead and develop that documentation. In fact, 5 OEMs and 4 suppliers were brought in by AIAG, and we had 2 OEMs and 5 suppliers brought in by the VDA for the writing committee. Amongst that, we had additional OEM and supplier support, and we also validated our concept with 22 companies in a trial where we did some trial training and trial development of the documentation. We finalized that with an industry stakeholder review where we received over 3,000 comments and feedback items from many of you that are probably on this call to identify changes and ask questions about what was being done and why it was being done in a certain manner. So we took about 15 months to go ahead and verify and validate those items. There was a question that popped up. VDA is the German association. It is a peer organization to AIAG. They function with some similarities and some differences, but they're the German Automobile Association. I apologize that I'm not speaking in German for you. Our AIAG VDA FMEA Handbook is able to be used it's primarily in the automotive industry. Most of the AIAG documents wind up being automotive customer specific requirements, but it is also applicable to any industry. The methodology is very solid, it's very fundamental, and the analysis can be used anywhere, whether it's automotive, aerospace, medical. SAE is used also in the automotive industry, but it is used very heavily in aerospace, but it also can be used with any industry. Their writing team consisted of automotive experts, but also had subject matter experts from the field and from other industries, including some consultants. Both writing teams did share a handful of members, so there was some cross-pollination between the 2 documents. Next slide, please. So both documents use a multi-stepped approach. At AIAG, we developed with VDA a 7-step approach where we start with planning the process. We identify what we're trying to accomplish. From there, we start visualizing our scope, which would be our step 2. And our step 3 is we identify and we visualize the function. We try to figure out what are we trying to accomplish and how are we going to build the device or design the device to accomplish what we are intending. From there, we identify our failure chain, quite succinctly, what can go wrong and how severe will that be. We look at our risk analysis where we start analyzing our controls, and we also analyze how likely is something to occur. And then which is new to our FMEA methodology from 4th edition, is a step called optimization. Prior to that, it was referred to as recommended actions. And many of you probably had RPN thresholds where if an RPN hit a certain number, you had to identify a recommended action. With the new update to the methodology, optimization is considered a critical step in completing an FMEA. And it is identified as something that should be done every time you complete an FMEA step. Now, whether you actually have an optimization activity that you're going to utilize is still up to the user and the development team, but that is something now that is mandatory. And the concept of an RPN threshold, which was never in 4th edition, is not applicable at this point moving forward. And then finally, results documentation. Typically, the output of that would be the FMEA form that gets either shared with the team, the customer, or whoever needs to be given access to that as an interested party. We do provide multiple ways to share that content, both internally and externally. Plus, there is an allowance for some customization depending on what your customer specific requirement is. SAE uses a very similar approach, but they've broken theirs up into 6 steps. And again, they plan the project. Their FMEA preparation, as Jeremy will go into more detail on, is a combination of our structure and our function analysis. Their technical risk and everything from the way on down is is similar to what we are doing. It's just there is some differences in how they're identifying and how they're causing things. And then there's also some differences in some of the tools that they're using throughout. So with that, next slide, please. And I'll hand this back over to Jeremy.
I'll come off mute there. One thing that I kind of wanted to share before we go into the differences, notice the similarities. I want to bring us all to a common state of things we could agree on, right? It used to be in FMEA that you would start at the left-hand side, let's say item, function, requirement, and you would race to the right-hand side, right? You'd go item, function, requirement, failure mode, effect, cause, all that jazz. But the new method, regardless if it's step 6 or a 7-step process, is going to look at the FMEA as a process. So the new methodology across the board and common to both is one of steps. So you go to step 1, and then I want you to think of it like a gate review. Then you go to step 2, and then there's another review, and then you go to step 3. It really is a vertical style of methodology, which has been a substantial shift. So whether you're a fan of the 6 steps or whether you're a fan of the 7, fundamentally, the way FMEA has been completed and thought of is going to shift. So if we look at commonalities, this is where the common structure is going to stop. Where I am going to move now is I'm going to begin on DFMEA. So those of you that are familiar with design FMEA, we're going to cover design FMEA first. This will probably take about 15 minutes or so. And then I'm going to cover PFMEA. So if you're process focused, stay tuned after the D and we'll get to P. All right. Now, in step 1 of the AIAG VDA, they define the scope using an in-out diagram. And we use a term called levels, right? Is a good way to look at this. There are levels to this game. And so if we have a brake caliper over here, the disc brake sub is at level 2, and then it's broken into the rotor and the caliper, which is here and here. And then we break down into the pistons, the seals, the boots, the brake pads, all of that jazz. In SAE's version, they utilize the same concept, but they use the term hierarchy. It's the same concept, just a different term. However, what is unique to SAE is that they're going to move in some form of a risk analysis. So in the SAE examples that come from the manual, you'll use a wiper system, which consists of the motor and the arm. And within the arm, you've got the blade, the module, and the relay. So what they're going to ask you to do commonly is plan your attack, right? You're going to figure out what your structure is, how it works, and get comfortable in what you are going to cover and what you're not. Now, AIAG VDA has a similar thing to this risk analysis where we talk about foundations and family FMEAs. Which ones are you going to bring into the analysis? Which ones are you going to modify? So a unified thing in step one is the idea of planning your work prior to delving into the FMEA. Whether you want to call it levels or whether you want to call it hierarchy, totally up to you at this point. So step one, generally the same sorts of things. Now, if we go one step further, let's take a look at step two. Now, in steps 2 and 3 of the AIAG method, we separate structure and function. So the similar tools, though, are utilized, and the intent is the same. In step 2, you're going to look at and use tools similar to a block diagram. We also introduce something called a structure tree, and there is a push toward a visually graphical representation of structure. So at each different level, which areas make up which units, and how do these flow into the higher unit, and how do these higher units flow into the higher level of design. Now, for those that were familiar with FMEA 4th edition, because from our poll, you guys said you were, here, the block or boundary style diagram is still utilized and still very valid. Now, in the SAE version, they also are going to talk about the use of the block diagram, and they also add in function and requirement. Now, function requirement relationships are the same as the AIAG VDA. Now, let me kind of go through that with you here for just a second. I'm going to go ahead and clear this out, and I'm going to stop my share. When we talk about FMEA, function is largely thought of as a verb noun. Do this to this, right? Transport force, stop axial rotation, that sort of thing. And the requirement is always the measurable manifestation of function. So the same function being a verb noun and the requirements being the measurable manifestations of function still are present in both. So where we might take structure first and then do function, SAE combines a structural function analysis into that step 2. As Brian covered in the 7 steps, that's kind of where Brian was talking about that they combine 2 of them. Now, I will tell you, after doing this for 2 years, the structural analysis is key to function. Now, when we do this part, getting clear on structure leads to function. If something is a structural component, it's got to have a function. So this step has some subtle differences, but the intent is the same. Get to structure, analyze your structural components for function, and then link them to the applicable requirements to measure that function. Okay? Now, one of the key differences, I do want to spend a little bit of time here, folks. AIAG VDA uses a hierarchical approach to the failure mechanism. Now, I want to talk to you for just a moment about the failure chain, okay? The failure chain reads like the failure cause results in the failure mode, which is felt in the failure effect. Now, let me go ahead. I'm going to clear this out and I'm going to do a little bit of live draw with you here because I don't want to death by PowerPoint you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop my share for just a moment and we're going to do a little bit of live draw because there is a subtle difference in the concept and the way the failure chain is portrayed. Okay. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay. We can largely agree that the failure cause results in the failure mode, which is felt in the failure effect. The FE is driven by the FM, which is caused by the FC. Now, you folks remember when you went through school, when you learned addition, you check your addition through subtraction. So if I give you an effect, it should be the result of the mode, which was caused by something. In the old fourth edition, this was a source of error, let's say, in companies. In the old fourth edition, you had the function and the requirement, which then resulted in the failure mode. That's the way the form was laid out, which then resulted in the failure effect. This made logical sense, right? It's a two-way type of interaction, right? If I give you the effect, you should be able to tell me the mode. And if I give you the mode, you should be able to tell me the effect. But the piece that was substantially and significantly out of bed with the rest was the failure cause. The failure cause was out of alignment with the failure chain. And so in the AIAG VDA version of FMEA, the failure effect when it comes to DFMEA is always on the higher level design element. The failure mode is always on the design element you're focusing on. And the failure cause is always caused by the lower level design element. So inherently in their failure chain, the FE is created by the FM, which is caused by the FC. And so it is very easy to check your work to make sure that you have a causal chain in your failure. And the reason why this is important, and this is a difference, I'm not saying it's better or worse. There are levels to this game. And if you are at a certain level of integration, say this is the disc brake system, when you drop levels, the failure mode becomes the failure effect, the failure cause becomes your focus element, and then you are able to find the new failure causes for that failure mode of the focus element. And what this does, if you hierarchically lay out your DFMEA, if you're given a failure effect, you should be able to flow down to the true root cause. This helps teams categorize and leads to a higher quality of event through isolating the areas under consideration. And the reason why I took you through that is because from the manual, that's pretty much what this graphic is saying here. And they kept the failure chain very, very structured so that you always have a causal relationship. Now, on the contrast, the SAE sticks to the more traditional model of the mode leading to the effect. So there's your mode, there's your effect, and then you've got your causes. So some of the confusion that the way the formatting was in the fourth edition has been carried over in some ways. So that's a huge difference between the two. And again, it's neither better nor worse, but it is different, and it will be up to your organization to determine what quality of event you want. All right, let's clear this out. Now, when we go into risk analysis, in step 5 of the AIAG VDA, when it comes to DFMEA, there is a new version of driver. And because we had just as many folks familiar with the AIAG VDA as we're familiar with 4th edition, you know that there is a new thing called an action priority. This is AP. And folks, don't overcomplicate this. Action priority comes in 3 flavors: high, medium, and low. So the S, O, and D are still there: severity, occurrence, and detection. So they kept the S, O, and the D, but you're now going to utilize AP. And in step 4 of the SAE, they assess the same severity, occurrence, and detection. And they include the alternative risk assessment, such as S times O, criticality matrices, everything that we have in ours. So they use the same thing. And I'll tell you, their tables are a little different, and the risk prioritization utilizes the same HML designation. Now, there are subtle differences in the tables. I will tell you that there are subtle differences. It is up to you at that point to determine whether those differences are meaningful or whether they're inconsequential. That's not something that I can necessarily give as an answer. Now, the nice thing about this is, and I do want to kind of share with you a commonality on here. It used to be, as Brian said, we would use RPN and establish a threshold, right? That was some older practice that carried over. The problem was, if it was a little bit off, we would get a very different value, let's say in RPN, changing from, say, a 5 to a 7 in something. With H, M, and L, you now have a risk analysis in both methods that is more robust to variation put together by the teams. So this is a commonality. They do have subtly different tables. It's up to you at that point to determine what you would like to do. All right, so the big changes from the DFMEA. You still have the 7 steps or the 6 steps. We covered some of the different tools that different manuals may recommend. We took a look at the hierarchical nature of the failure chain being the biggest difference as a technical practitioner that I see, as well as a separation between structure and function. Okay. Now, let's talk about PFMEA. So again, there's 6 steps in SAE, there's 7 steps in AIAG VDA. Now, in step 1, planning and prep, it's very much the same thing. You are defining what is in scope, what is out of scope. The only thing that is drastically different is in SAE, they're going to ask you that you might do a risk prioritization to determine whether or not certain stations need to be created, updated, that sort of thing. Now, it's totally up to you. This was also present in AIAG. We use the term foundation or families. As an example, if you're bringing on a cutting process and you're cutting to length, the errors to cutting to length, too short, too long, are relatively universal. So you'd bring out that foundation and you determine based on the project whether or not you had to update, adjust, and which version you brought out. Now, for those that are familiar with Six Sigma, this is very similar in DMAIC to defining the project, right? In Six Sigma, you used to do a project charter. It's very similar. You're defining where the boundaries are, you're defining the resources, and in AIAG VDA, we're going to recommend the use of the 5 T's: intent, team, timing, tools, task. So this is kind of a similarity, but there is a strong urging toward a risk prioritization when it comes to SAE. All right. Now, changes in step 2 for structure. Okay, this is one of the places where we separate structure from function. Now, in AIAG, we're going to recommend, cajole, let's say, for the use of a structure tree. Now, it is not a required thing. This is an option in which you look at the work elements that create the process steps that then form the line. And then when you go to functional analysis, each structural element has to have its own functions. So we've taken the thing, we've separated them out, and structure comes first and then dictates function. But now wait, there's more. I'm not saying that it's always a one-way valve. You may determine that you have functionality on your process steps that you don't have a structural element to pull off, and so you may augment. Now, in SAE, they're going to recommend the use of a process flow diagram, and they have a very specific form that they give as an example. So there's an example there in which you put in the type of operation, and then you put in the outputs of the operation. In AIAG VDA, they still recommend for the use of a process flow diagram. So while I did separate AIAG and VDA relating to structure and function, there are similar intents with very different tools. And I will tell you again, after the last 2 years, being able to separate structure prior to function is one of the key differentiators leading to a higher quality of event. Now, that being said, you're going to want to blow this up, large and in charge. Notice that this is the functional analysis for AIAG. We identify the operator, we identify the press machine during structural analysis. One of the issues in the traditional 4th edition is because we did not identify structure, we did not have a good causal chain for failure. Folks, hear me very clearly. When it comes to the AIAG VDA method, work elements create functions, and the failure to fulfill those functions cause issues on the process steps. Okay? So this is a key difference between the functional analysis here and the functional analysis structure mashup, let's say in SAE. Am I saying that you need to go to this route in order to have a high quality of event? Absolutely not. I am not advocating for one nor the other. This is simply differences. But in traditional 4th edition FMEA, in order to get all of the structural elements that would cause failure, it required a very skilled facilitator in order to get to that place. This method doesn't require as much skill from the facilitator because the methodology inherently checks the work, so to speak. Okay, so you can get to good spots in both places, and both methodologies recognize function as a key starting point before failure. And I want to make sure that I cover that. I'm going to stop share just so we can go eye to eye on that for a second. Function comes before failure. For those that are out there in webinar world, many of us engaged in FMEAs in which we would go into the room and we would automatically just start jumping to conclusions and throwing out failures. Both methods can agree that function is the primary driver in a positive sense, and failure is the negation of that function. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look now at the failure chain, as long as we took a look at function. Now, in AIAG VDA, they have failure. It's failure chain. We've already beat the failure chain to death, right? Failure chain is the same. Now, notice the failure causes here are always the negation of the work elements. Now, could that be the case in SAE? Absolutely. But because the structural analysis isn't separated from function, sometimes it is more difficult to tease those structural elements that can fail out. And in SAE, they kept the same mode to effect and cause structure that in 4th edition led to sometimes a less than optimal event. So Do you have to go to this route, to this level of doing the work elements, the process steps, the process item? Maybe, maybe not. That's up to your organization to decide. Now, as we now go through the failure chain, what's going to happen is both groups agree that you have prevention and detections, and in AIAG method, we're still utilizing the AP, okay? Now, if you dig into both books have alternative risk assessments. I'm going to say alternative risk assessments. Even AIAG VDA does not forbid the use of RPN. In black and white, it says that RPN can be used as one indicator, one facet to augment the AP. And it even advocates for an S times O as one facet of it. Same thing is true in SAE. I think what I want to cover as a commonality between both methods is that every risk-based system out there, and Bill kind of hit on this, right? I have 5 books out there in the field on medical device, aerospace, ISO, IATF. All of them use severity, occurrence, and detection in some form or another. And so even the creation of AP or the risk prioritization doesn't forbid the use of other facets for decision making. And one of the things I liked about SAE here is that we have special characteristics in the AIAG method right here. SAE breaks out the product and process special characteristics. Now, if you follow both methods completely the way that they're supposed to be done, will you still arrive at the same place of having both product and process special characteristics? Sure. Do both map 100% to the control plan? Absolutely. This one is a little bit more visually pleasing, to me at least as a technical analyst, in terms of what I need to make sure of that I have. So there are some good augmentations technically in both areas. Now, comment to what Brian was mentioning. Step 6, right? We used to think of that as the recommended actions column. Step 6, called optimization, is still the recommended actions column. So it's an action item list, right? Once you've got your risk analysis, you determine what you are going to work on and what you're not going to work on, and you make your decision. Now, the one thing that I'll say that is augmented in the AIAG VDA as a highlight, not as better or worse, but augmented. In the old method, a lot of times we changed values, but we couldn't prove why we did it. So there's a new push with the action taken with pointer to evidence that links changes in your AP to the documents and the tests that you actually did to validate the results. Now, should you have been doing this anyway? Yeah. Is this revolutionary in its approach? No. Might it help your organization check its work, let's say, to make sure that you're not inadvertently reducing things when you have really no proof? Yeah. So optimization is very similar to the recommended actions tab. And I think that it's interesting that they chose the term optimization because risk-based thinking is evolving. And as a general rule, risk can never be eliminated fully. It is mitigated or managed. So when we talk about the terms optimization, it's saying you will never bring risk to zero. You will optimize within the realm of what is in your control to bring risk to an acceptable level. I think risk elimination is one of those things we're getting out of the habit of an industry of thinking about because we realize that it's kind of like air. It gets in everywhere. All right. Brian, what I'd like to do, I'd like to turn it back over to you here for step 7 and summarize kind of the results documentation and take this slide.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it. So we're talking about step 7, that is documenting the results, and that's the form. One of the initial feedbacks that we received with the AIAG and VDA methodology is, wow, that's a very, very large form. And we heard a lot of questions and comments about that. But what's interesting is when I look over the form and I look at the analysis of the higher level and then the next higher level, and looking at establishing that failure chain, not only within your organization, but after it leaves the organization, a lot of you are already doing that analysis on 4th edition. And really what had happened when we developed that form is that many of those cells that you were combining 3 and 4 different or distinct items in are now broken out into dedicated columns. So there is some specific analysis that's going on, but for the most part, you're already doing it anyway. When we shared our form with the team during validation, a lot of the younger engineers that came in said, wow, this is very logical, it makes sense, and it clicked with them real quickly. SAE also developed a form that is much closer in line with what 4th edition had. There is some modifications to it from what the old 4th edition form was, but it's a very functional, very usable form. And as Jeremy pointed out here, even discussing the step 6, our optimization phase, they have some things that they document very, very well. And I was very impressed with what they did on that end. So both forms are very functional. They're very practical. We do include with the AIAG and VDA FMEA methodology, customer specific forms. For instance, our Form G is the customer specific requirement for what was FCA US, now part of Stellantis. And that's including the SO, SD, OD calculations in there. So as we look at it and we develop the form, we wanted to give some flexibility to allow how you're reporting that out. The big thing I come back to is that while the form is important and the form typically is a deliverable we're providing to our customer, it really goes back to the methodology and ensuring you're doing the right things, analyzing your part or design or your process design appropriately, and reporting out the results in a way that's technically correct and easily communicatable within not only your team, but your customer team as well. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Brian. All right, with that, we'd like to kind of do one more poll here. Let's go ahead and get you guys engaged here. I've been going for about 47 minutes, so I'm pretty sure you guys might be a little bit shell-shocked by now here. Let's go ahead and launch a poll. And again, the fun stops when I hit 80%. The first one, how many dedicated FMEA moderators, facilitators do you have? And lastly, how many projects will you be completing within the next 2 years? And the reason I ask is that's going to impact some decisions you're going to make around your customer requirements. And then the last question on your software. I do want to cover that for just one brief moment, as Brian already kind of said this. When it comes to software, Brian even mentioned that they got some feedback that the form was quite heavy in the AIAG VDA method. And while it can be done using spreadsheets, in more complex applications, you will have a harder time keeping track. It does really become more of a database. So while software is not required, software inevitably will be something you will probably want to look at down the road. And that's coming from somebody that spent the last 2 years since this thing has come out, working with companies that largely use spreadsheets. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop this poll here, and let's go ahead and take a look at what we got. Your facilitators, moderators, most of you at least recognize the role of the facilitator moderator. Less than 20 projects, and the good news is you're all together using spreadsheets. Now, before we kind of go into the Q&A, one thing that I will mention here, let's go ahead and stop this, is that if you find the need later on and your customers drive SAE, these are available through Plexus International. If you are needing the AIAG VDA, definitely get a hold of AIAG, okay? What I hope I've provided over this time, just so you folks know, is a comparison of the similarities between the two, the key areas in where they split for both design and process. And what I really wanted to try to do with this webinar is I wanted to make sure that we didn't bias one way nor the other. It is up to your organization to determine, based on CSRs, your level of comfort, and the information we presented, how you want to continue knowing that you have this information. So what I'd like to do, Bill, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, Bill, let's start the Q&A for Brian and myself.
Okay, got some doozies for you here. Now, let's start with a simple one. Is it planned to harmonize further methods between AIAG and VDA, such as control plans and inspection plans?
I'm going to leave that to Mr. Martinson.
As of now, no. Any core tool updates that AIG is looking at in the immediate future would be internal updates for our AIG documents. We never say never on anything, but we do realize that with some of the need for speed to develop some of these items, we can, it took 4 years to develop our FMEA methodology with VDA because there were a lot of paradigms that both organizations had to break down with their bases. So right now, no, but we never say never on anything either.
Okay, probably another Brian question. Have any of the IATF subscribing OEMs defined a time scale or when the supply chain must use the AIAG VDA Handbook rather than the 4th edition tool?
Yes, this was announced in our 2019 Quality Summit. And I wanted to get the year straight because this COVID year has kind of thrown all the relationship on timing off with that for me. But FCA, Ford, and Honda North America, all who participated from the AIAG side, writing the handbook, they are accepting it immediately. General Motors was still investigating. We don't have a hard letter from them, but they are accepting. They did put some information out there. The latest information is available on the AIG website. You have to go back to a blog from a couple years ago, but specifically, I'd recommend to look at your customer-specific requirements on that because they do have phased time-ins. Initially, they weren't looking at you going back, but they said they all were saying there will be a point where everything would have to be switched over.
Okay, if I have a part with no special characteristics, but I know that one of the processes will create a special characteristic critical feature, can I define that process as a special characteristic?
For that, I'm going to lean on the IATF, in which you are required not only to list the characteristics that are given to you, but those characteristics where you know as the subject matter expert and as the commodity expert, it's key to getting something done. So yes, you are allowed to sandpaper your own backside with as many special characteristics as you would like.
Okay, is this correct that this FE, FM, FC breakdown implies that the FC true root cause is related to the functional failure of the next level as opposed to design methodology failure? Example, incorrect specifications, which would be something procedural.
Okay, now this is a fascinating topic. So I'm going to go to some next level stuff. And so for you guys that are on this call, this one might make brains explode. The DFMEA is about the part interaction. So if you misrepresented the material and chose a material for, say, it was too soft, the way you want to think of the DFMEA, the part is the thing in the car, not your design methodology. The DFMEA as a methodology would best be served by a PFMEA on the process of design. Yeah, let that sink through. So you've got a design process. You do a PFMEA on the process of design because your designer is not in the car with that part. The part is, so if the bushing is soft, that soft bushing is the thing that is traveling down the road at 100 miles an hour. So yes, think about PFMEA for the process of design.
Okay, should companies take actions for high, medium level action priorities? And if they cannot, what is your recommendation?
I would say I'm going to go with the safe answer on this one. In the AIAG VDA Handbook, there is in the text what you should do with an H, M, and an L. And it will be up to the individual company to determine, based on their risk profile and their level of comfort, what they want to do. As a technical expert and as somebody who is working with AIAG on this, I don't want to answer for my recommendation because I don't feel that right now is my place. I don't know your industry, commodity, or company.
What are the common triggers to identify DFMEA projects?
That's very easy. That comes from the 4th edition. It was even there, right? It's a new part. It's the existing part in a new usage profile, or it's a change to a part. So if you're going to change the diameter, you need to look at the DFMEA to determine what the risks are and what that diameter links to. You're going to use that part, say, in an underhood application instead of on an outdoor application. You need to bring the DFMEA to determine what risks you're introducing. The same usage cases that were in the 4th edition need to be carried over to here.
Okay, somebody asked, what was AP? You mentioned AP in the presentation. They asked, could we tell them what AP was?
Action priority. And the action priority is either high, medium, or low. H, M, or L.
Okay.
And an important point to make with action priority, Bill, sorry to cut you off there with the next question. Action priority is weighted. When we look at RPN, it was a straight arithmetic calculation, and you could play with the Excel numbers if you're using Excel and had that formula set up and find out 3 ways to multiply a number together. And which, if you're using a threshold, trust me, I know you did, because I did it when I was given a threshold too. You get creative with the math. AP is weighted heavier to severity, then to occurrence, then to detection. And that plays out on the table where you look at these 9s and 10s for severity, which do encompass safety items and things like that, now lend itself to more high action priorities, but the 1s and 2s on severity you're seeing more mediums and lows.
Oh. Okay, are there differences in the ways that customer dictated special characteristics are to be communicated and managed? Comparison, correlation tables, etc.
I'm going to say that I'm going to lean on the IATF and the Section 8 defining, like 8.1 and 8.2, you make the deal. The same challenges you have in defining those before, you still have now. The FMEA will not talk about your communication channels. So that's very much contract negotiation.
How does the new FEMA approach apply to off-highway products, agriculture, constructions, etc.?
I'm going to go ahead and speak from my experience. In the last 2 years, we have been approached by off-highway companies wanting to adopt this. And the farther you get down the road from certain automotive, say passenger applications, we're seeing more and more adoption. And I think, Brian, you can talk to off-road vehicles adopting some of this. I know I've personally worked with some that are off-highway, and they're seeing it as a higher quality of event. Brian?
Yeah, and to that effect, Jeremy, you look right in the cover of the AIAG VDA Handbook there. Daimler Truck was one of the participating members. So this is not strictly for passenger vehicles. We also at AIG get interest from other companies that don't see the road on their vehicle, and they are interested in using this methodology. Very applicable, because you are looking at structure, function, and risk, which is, again, if you're designing a snowmobile or an ATV or anything, those are all things you're considering at that point. What am I trying to do? How am I trying to build it? And what's my risk? And how am I going to mitigate that risk?
My favorite one over the last 2 years, just so you know, was a fast food chain that leases equipment to its franchisees. And we did machine FMEAs utilizing the AIAG FMEA method. So in the last 2 years, we've even seen it in fast food application.
Okay, the slides were very focused on hardware. Does it make sense to perform a DFMEA on software as well?
There are different applications for software, probably better methodologies. I'll let Brian kind of talk to that. We are seeing, though, that in some design, when you have software applications and you are asking that software to make a decision, that's a function for that software. So in multi-level DFMEAs, we are seeing some software being applicable. Brian?
Yeah, and I would agree with that. One thing we saw, and I learned, I didn't realize some industries handle this differently. When you look at semiconductors, we were instructed they do process FMEA before they do design FMEA, because they're building a product that's based off of what they can manufacture and designing to what their manufacturing process can do. So there is applicability. We would look at that and say, what's your requirement? What are you trying to do? And how does this work? If you have a better tool that's not a customer specific requirement, again, that's up to your industry that you're using, but there is applicability to software with this. And on a broader note, at AIG, that is something we're looking more and more at, because we realize there is more software It's something that's come up, I know, on the steering committee levels as to how do we handle it. The problem is we're still trying to figure out how do we want to handle it. So we don't have a definitive answer on some of these, but the applicability of these core tools, it does work.
Yeah,
So-
we've done some with hardware and then a software overlay, and we've used the decision, the fact that that software has to make the decision to be the required functionality.
And guys, we're going to stick one more question in here because we are tight on time here. I am going to put my email address into the chat box. And feel free to reach out to me with any questions, because I'll tell you, there's 75 questions and there's no way I was going to do that in 10 minutes. So feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have, and I will work with Brian and Jeremy on getting them answered. So if you look in the chat box, you will see my email address. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you. The last question, gentlemen, what would be the concrete actions for my company to take to migrate from the old to the new AIAG VDA?
All right, I'll take this one first and I'll let Brian kind of give his opinion on it. Over the last 2 years, we've had a lot of organizations do this. We published a white paper with AIAG at the beginning, a couple of years back, and it had the steps you needed to take. Without a doubt, my first thing that I recommend companies do, practice in the micro, perfect it in the micro before launching it to the macro. Every time a company has said, we're going to take all our new programs and the most complex ones, and we're going to go all in on this new method. It's like cleaning your room, right? You have to make a bigger mess before you can get to organization. Start with a very well-known product. Start with a very well-known process. Even take one step of that product or process and try the methodology on that one known safe sandbox. Once you've perfected that methodology, then take it up a level and start with the next new program, okay? But don't try to start something new with the next new program, because then you're uphill battle with two different areas. Brian?
I agree with that wholeheartedly. The other thing I would throw on there is this cross-functional teams. Make sure you're getting people in there. I know habitually we can crank out these FMEAs and think, oh, we've got it. Let's make some minor changes. We're good to go. Get the team involved, bring everybody in. The other thing though is have some patience with it. Remember, as you're starting small, you're still creating new muscle memory. We've done some variation of FMEA 4th edition for 30 years as an industry now, and now we're changing it. And by doing that change, we're creating new patterns, new ways of thinking, different detailed ways of thinking, and it's going to take some time. It's not always going to be something that the switch flips automatically. When I was sitting in the meetings for 2 years, we had a lot of the best brains of the industry in there, both with the AIAG and with the VDA. I was impressed with the brain power in there. And even then, every now and then, you'd see somebody or hear somebody on the call hit that point where they're like, I'm not quite grasping it yet. And then all of a sudden the light goes on. So if these are people that do FMEA for a living and you're changing your organization, you have different levels of familiarity. Remember, it's going to take some time to get this all up to speed.
Okay, folks, we appreciate everybody being here today. I'm going to save myself about 200 emails. I already know right now. I'm going to tell you once again that this webinar was recorded and you will receive a link for on-demand viewing within 2 days of the completion of this webinar. So please don't send me an email saying, send me a copy. You know, we know you want a copy. We got your email. We know what to, so trust me, if you don't get a copy by what's today, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, if you don't get a copy by a link by Tuesday of next week, feel free to email me to death and I will make sure you get a copy. But, be patient and save me 200 emails to start the day out. So thank you very much, Jeremy. Brian, thank you. Excellent presentation. So I look forward to working with everybody going forward. Thank you.
Right. Run far, run fast, folks. Get on out of here.
Thanks for attending. Take care, everyone.